And this story is called The Scuttling or Down by the Sea with Marvin and Pamela. And this story, the protagonist is, if you want to call him that, you can hardly call him that, is sexist and racist and classist, just an all-round ignorant guy. But he definitely gets more than his in the end. The Bradshaws got back from their vacation late Friday evening and discovered right away that they were not alone. Marvin Bradshaw was coming up the front walk, having gone across the road to pick up their accumulated mail from the neighbors when he heard his wife scream. He ran up the stairs and into the house, cursing and wishing he had tried a little harder to get that pistol permit. There were no intruders to be seen, only his wife standing white-faced and trembling in the kitchen, pointing in the direction of the sink. "Look," she said. He looked, wondering what he was supposed to see. Everything was as he remembered, and he had never given much attention to the kitchen area, which, after all, wasn't his department. He said, "What?" Then he saw something small and dark moving rapidly along the sink's rim. Now he saw another one, slightly larger, going up the wall behind the faucets. "Son of a bitch," Marvin Bradshaw said. "Cockroaches." "I came in here to get a drink of water." Pamela Bradshaw's voice was almost a whisper, as if that one scream had used up all her volume reserves. "I turned on the light, and Marvin, they were everywhere. They were running in all directions." She shuddered. "I think one ran over my foot." Marvin Bradshaw stepped toward the sink, but the cockroaches were too fast for him. The one on the sink dived off into space, hit the floor, and slipped into a barely visible crack beneath the baseboard. The one on the wall evaded Marvin's slapping hand and disappeared into the cupboard space above the sink. Marvin swore in frustration. Felt a little relieved, too. Hadn't really been eager to crush a cockroach with his bare hand. "Cockroaches," he said. "Wonderful. Bust your ass for years. Finally get out of the city, away from the dirt and the colors, into a three-quarter mill house on one of the best pieces of oceanfront property on Long Island. And then you go away for a couple of weeks. When you get home, you got cockroaches. Jesus." He glared at his wife. "You know who's responsible, don't you? You had to go hire that goddamn Mexican maid." "Inez is Guatemalan," Pamela protested, "and we don't know Mexican, Guatemalan, who gives a shit?" Marvin had never seen the point of those picky-ass distinctions between people who said "si" when they meant "yes." Maybe you needed to know the difference between Japs and Chinamen, since nowadays you had to do business with the bastards, but spics were spics, whatever hellhole country they came from. "The fact remains," he said, "we never had cockroaches here, and then 2 months ago you hired her, and now we do. I'm telling you, you let those people in, you got roaches. Didn't I run that block of buildings in Spanish Harlem for your father back before we got married? Cockroaches and Puerto Ricans. I saw enough of both. Don't tell me." "I'll speak to her when she comes in tomorrow." "No, you won't." He took a sheet of folded paper from the stack of mail in his left hand. "That was what I was coming to tell you. Look what your precious Inez left us." She took the paper and unfolded it. The message was printed in pencil in large, clumsy block capitals. "No mas. You no pay me 5 weeks now. Go live sister in Arizona. Please send my money Margarita Flores, 7281 Del Monte, Tucson, Arizona, 85707. Inez." Marvin took the note back and wadded it up and hurled it at the kitchen wastebasket, missing. "Come in here, turns our house into a roach motel, runs out on us when our backs are turned, then she expects to get paid. Lots of luck, you fat wet-backed bitch." Pamela sighed. "I miss her all the same. You know, I was working with her, trying to help her remember her past lives. I believe she was a Mayan princess." Marvin groaned. "Christ's sake," he said, "not now, all right?" He hadn't had much fun over the last 2 weeks. He hadn't liked Miami, which had been swarming with small brown people and where there had been nothing to do but swim, which in his book was something you did only to keep from drowning. Lie around getting a tan, if you were asshole enough to want to look colored. The flight home had been delayed again and again. All in all, this was no time to have to listen to Pamela and her New Age crap. "Okay," he told her. "We'll go out, get something to eat. Monday I'll call an exterminator. Antonio's okay? I could go for seafood." Driving away from the house, he considered that at least there was one good side to the situation. Eating out would give him a chance to have some real food, rather than that organic slop that Pamela tended to put on the table. He suspected this was merely a cover for her basic incompetence in the kitchen. Chopping up a lot of raw vegetables was as close to real cooking as she could manage. "Marvin," Pamela said suddenly, "you said an exterminator. You mean someone who'll kill the cockroaches?" He glared at her, wondering what the hell now. "What? You worried about chemicals, poisons like that? Well, that too. Pamela paused, frowning. Marvin realized he just handed her something else to be a pain in the ass about. What I was going to say, she went on, isn't there some other way, besides killing them? Christ, Marvin ground his teeth. You want to get rid of the roaches, but you don't want the poor little things hurt. What's that, more Oriental mumbo-jumbo? Roaches might be somebody's reincarnated souls. I wish you wouldn't be so negative about reincarnation, she said stiffly. I suppose it's not part of the religion you were brought up in. Actually, Marvin Bradshaw's parents had never shown any interest in any religion at all. He had followed their lead. Churches were places you went for funerals and weddings, and then only if you couldn't get out of it. All he had against reincarnation was it was believed in by people from India, such as the one who collected fat payments for sitting around in a sheet spouting this shit to Pamela and a bunch of other goofy middle-aged women. And Hindus, after all, were just another variety of little brown bastards who ought to go back where they came from, which in the case of the said Baba La Mahavishnu, Marvin suspected would be somewhere in New Jersey. That was another matter. In any case, Pamela added, it's not true that human beings can be reborn as insects. That's a Western misconception. Then, still in all, Marvin, Pamela bashed right on over him, an avalanche, great unstoppable force. Babaji says it's always best to avoid harming any living creature. The karma accumulates. All those roaches, there must be hundreds, even thousands, disgusting to our eyes, of course, but so many lives. I can't imagine the karmic consequences of killing them all. Then what do you want me to do about the friggin' things? Ask them nicely to leave? Get them their own place? How about you go talk to them, he said, enraged beyond control. That would make any self-respecting insect hit the road. She didn't answer. From the tone of her silence, Marvin figured one of them would be sleeping in the guest bedroom tonight. Well, that was another bonus. Pamela kept up the silent treatment almost all the way through dinner. Marvin knew it was too good to last. Sure enough, as he was finishing up his lobster, she started in again. My God, he said, couldn't you wait till we're out of here? Talking about roaches. What, are you trying to make me sick? He leaned back and looked at the remains of his meal. He didn't really like lobster all that well. He just ordered this one to jerk Pamela's chain. Antonio's was one of those places with live lobsters in a big glass tank, so you could pick yours and have them boil his ass alive. Marvin had enjoyed saying boil his ass alive and watching Pamela cringe. She hadn't been too horrified, he noticed, to clean her own plate. Probably thought all those clams and scallops had died naturally. Ocean roadkill, maybe. Run over by submarine. He got up, tossing his napkin on the table, and headed for the men's room. As he was coming back, the proprietor stepped out in his path. Mr. Bradshaw, Antonio said, I hope your dinner was satisfactory. Marvin nodded and tried to smile. Antonio was small and dark, and his black hair was a little too glossy. But he came from a Portuguese family that had been in the area for a couple of centuries at least. He ran a hell of a good restaurant. Marvin thought Antonio was okay for an Antonio. No offense, Antonio said, glancing around and lowering his voices, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation just now. You and everybody else in the place, Marvin said. Sorry if she upsets your customers, talking about cockroaches. She's been kind of weird last year or so. I think she's getting change of life. Oh, that's all right. Antonio made a quick no-problem gesture. No, what I was going to say, you're not the only one with roaches. I've heard a lot of people complaining last couple of weeks. It's like they just moved into the area. Made a face. For my business, it's something you worry about. Marvin thought it over. So it wasn't just his house. Must be the new people moving in, bringing the pests with them. The standards had really gone to hell around here since that housing discrimination lawsuit. Point is, Antonio went on, it won't be easy getting an exterminator any time soon. You do well to get one by the end of next week. Shit, Marvin said louder than he meant to. Hey, Antonio, I can't live with those things in the house for a week. You must know some people, guy in your line. You know anybody who might be willing to make a special call? I'll make it worth their while. Antonio shook his head. Believe me, all the ones I know are already making special calls, and charging through the nose, too. He rubbed his chin. Now, there's one possibility, maybe. Talk to me. Come on, Antonio. Help me out here. Well, one of my busboys, Antonio said. The one doing that table by the door, see? He's got this grandfather, supposed to be good at getting rid of roaches and rats and the like. Marvin saw a short, chunky, very dark kid in a white apron, coarsely, badly cut black hair, huge cheekbones, heavy eyebrows, big nose. What's he? Marvin said. Mexican? thinking, no way. Antonio laughed. Actually, he's an Indian. From India? No way in hell. Doesn't look it. No, American Indian. Some small tribe I can't even pronounce, got a reservation upstate. Huh? Marvin stared, amazed. As far as he knew, he had never seen an Indian in these parts before. It was one thing he had to say for Indians. Compared to other kinds of colored people, they kept to themselves, lived out in the sticks on reservations, didn't come pushing themselves in where they weren't wanted. I don't really know much about it, Antonio admitted. Some people I know in Amityville. The old man did a job for them, and they were very pleased. Didn't tell me a lot of details. Huh? Marvin said again. Redskin exterminator. Now I heard everything. He's not an exterminator, strictly speaking. Antonio gave Marvin an odd grin. This is the part your wife's going to like. He doesn't kill anything. He just makes the pests go away. Marvin turned his stare on to Antonio. This is a gag, right? You going to tell me he blows a horn or something and they follow him away like the Pied friggin' Piper? Hey, Antonio, do I look like I'm in the mood for comedy? No, this is for real. Antonio's face was serious. I'm not sure how he does it. What I heard, he sort of smokes them out. Indian secret, I guess. I'll be damned. For a moment, Marvin considered the idea. Indians did know a lot of tricks. Everybody knew that. Nah, thanks. I'll wait till Monday and hit the yellow pages. Hell, I could stand anything for a few more days. But later that night, about to go to bed in the guest bedroom, sure enough, he felt a sudden thirst. Went down to the kitchen to get himself a beer. He turned on the lights. There they were. Pamela hadn't been exaggerating. The cockroaches were everywhere. They swarmed over the sink and the counter and the dishwasher, the refrigerator and the walls and the floor. Little flat brown oblongs that began running all at once when the light came on, so that the whole room appeared to squirm sickeningly for a moment. In almost no time, most of the roaches had vanished. A few remained, high on the walls and other inaccessible places. Through the glass doors of the china cupboard, Marvin could see a couple of them perched on top of a stack of antique bone china dishes. And he glanced up and saw that there was a large roach on the ceiling directly above his head, its long feelers waving gently as if in greeting. It seemed to be looking at him, considering a drop. Jesus Christ! Marvin shouted, and ran from the kitchen without stopping to turn off the light. His hands were shaking as he picked up the phone. The restaurant was closed for the night. When he dialed Antonio's home phone, he had to listen to a lot of rings before Antonio picked up. Listen, Marvin said over Antonio's sleepy protest. You know that old Indian you were telling me about? How fast do you think you can get a hold of him? Next morning, when Marvin went nervously into the kitchen for his coffee, there were no roaches to be seen. He knew they were still there, hiding during the daylight hours. Still, it wasn't so bad so long as he couldn't see them. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and went out through the sliding glass doors to the sun deck. The sun was well up above the eastern horizon, and the light hurt his eyes. He wished he brought a pair of shades. He sat down at the little table at the north end of the sun deck, keeping his back to the sun. The Bradshaw's house was built at the edge of a rocky bluff, 60 or 70 feet above the ocean. If Marvin cared to look straight down through the cracks between the planks of the sun deck, he could see the white sand of what Pamela liked to call our beach. It wasn't much of a beach, just a narrow strip of sand that sloped steeply to the water. At high tide, it was almost entirely submerged. He tested his coffee cautiously. As he had expected, it was horrible. Have to start interviewing replacement help. Pamela's efforts in the kitchen were going to be almost as hard to live with as the cockroaches. Cockroaches. He made a disgusted face, not just to the bitter coffee. He'd really lost it last night. Now, sitting in the bright morning sunlight with the cool, clean wind coming off the sea, he couldn't believe he'd got into such a panic, over a few bugs. Calling Antonio up in the middle of the night, for God's sake, begging him to bring in some crazy old Indian. It'll be embarrassing as hell eating at Antonio's after this. Marvin raised the cup again and took a mouthful of coffee. God, it tasted bad. Even more gruesome than Pamela's usual coffee-making efforts, which was saying something. There even seemed to be something solid. He jerked suddenly back from the table, dropping the cup, spilled coffee over himself and not noticing. He raised his hand to his mouth and spat onto his palm the soggy cadaver of a drowned cockroach. Marvin leaped to his feet and dashed for the railing and energetically emptied his stomach in the direction of the Atlantic Ocean. It was then that Pamela appeared at the kitchen doorway. Marvin, she said, a couple of men are out front in a pickup truck. They say you sent for them. The kid from Antonio's was standing on the front porch, hands jammed into his ass pockets. With him was a little old man, no more than 5 feet tall, not much over 100 pounds, with a face like a sun-dried apple. They both wore faded jeans and cheap-looking checkered work shirts. The old man had on a mesh back cap with a dolphin's emblem on the front, some kind of feather dangling from the crown. Behind them in the driveway sat an old pickup truck, its paint so faded and scabbed with rust that it was impossible to tell what color it had originally been. The kid said, "Mr. Bradshaw, Mr. Coelho said you had a roach problem." The old man said something in a language that sounded like nothing Marvin had ever heard. The kid said, "My grandfather needs to have a look around before he can tell you anything." Marvin nodded weakly. He still felt dizzy and sick. "Sure," he said, and led the way back to the kitchen. Pamela came and stood in the kitchen doorway beside Marvin. He watched as the old Indian walked slowly about the kitchen, bending down and studying the baseboards, running his fingers under the edge of the counter and sniffling them, peering behind the refrigerator. Suddenly he squatted down and opened the access doors and reached up into the dark space beneath the sink. A moment later he was standing up again, holding something small and wiggly between his thumb and forefinger. His wrinkled dark face didn't really change expression, hadn't been wearing any recognizable expression to begin with. There was something like satisfaction in his eyes. He spoke again in that strange-sounding language. The kid said, "He needed to know what kind of roaches you had. He says, no problem. This kind is easy." The old man went out on the sun deck and flipped the cockroach over the rail. Came back and said something brief. "He says $100, the kid translated. For once, Marvin was in no mood to argue. He could still taste that coffee log cockroach. "When can he start?" "Right now," the kid said, "if that's okay." The kid went back up the hall. Marvin thought he should have had Pamela go along to make sure he didn't steal anything, but it was too late now. The old man continued to study the kitchen. A few minutes later, the kid was back with a pair of nylon carry-on bags, which he set on the counter beside the sink. The old man nodded, grunted, unzipped one of the bags, and began rummaging inside. While he was rummaging, the kid said, "Any animals in the house? Dogs? Cats?" Pamela shook her head. Marvin said, "Hell no." There was something he couldn't understand, people keeping dirty, hairy animals in the house. Maybe a good guard dog, but even he belonged outside behind a fence. "It would be better," the kid said, "if you could go somewhere, like out of the house, till this is over." "Yeah?" Marvin grinned. "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Pamela kicked his ankle. To the Indian kid, she said, "Is this going to involve any toxic chemicals?" No, nothing like that." The kid gestured at the pile of stuff the old man was taking out of the bag. "See, we don't even use respirators. No, it's just, well, better if you're not here." "Uh-huh," Marvin said. "Forget it, Geronimo. Nice try." The kid shrugged. "Okay." He turned and began unzipping the other bag. By now the old man had laid out several bundles of what looked like dried weeds. Now he selected 4 of these and twisted them together to form a single long bundle. From the bag he took a roll of ordinary white twine, began wrapping the bundle tightly from end to end, compressing it into a solid cylinder about the size and shape of a rolled-up newspaper. Put the rest of the stuff back into the bag and spoke to the kid. The kid had taken out a small drum, like a big tambourine without the metal jingles, and a long, thin stick with one end wrapped in what looked like rawhide. He gave the drum a tap and got a single sharp "poong" that filled the kitchen and floated off down the hallway. The old man produced a throwaway butane lighter, which he lit and applied to one end of the herb bundle. Marvin expected a quick flare-up. The stuff showed some reluctance to ignite. The old man turned the bundle in his fingers, blowing gently, till at last the end of the bundle was a solid glowing red coal. By now smoke was pouring from the bundle in thick white clouds, billowing up to the ceiling and then rolling down to fog the whole room. Marvin started to protest, and he decided that the smell wasn't bad at all. He recognized cedar in there. For an instant he recalled the time he had been allowed to burn the family tree after Christmas because his father was too drunk, and something that might be sage and other things he couldn't guess at. Hell, he thought, probably market this shit for some serious bucks. The old ladies in particular would go big for a new house scent. Now the old Indian was turning this way and that, waving the smoldering bundle, getting the smoke into all the corners of the room. The kid started beating his drum. Poong, 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 poong. And the old man commenced to sing. At least that was what he seemed to think he was doing, though for sure he was no Tony Bennett. It was a weird, monotonous tune, maybe half a dozen notes repeated over and over, and the words didn't sound like words at all, just nonsense syllables such as a man might sing if he'd forgotten the lyrics. Whatever it was, Marvin Bradshaw didn't like it a damn bit. He started to speak, tell the old man to get on with the fumigating and never mind the musical production number. But the 2 Indians were already walking past him and up the hallway, trailing clouds of smoke and never missing a beat or a hey-ya. Marvin said, "Ah, screw this," and turned to follow, to put a stop to this crap before it went any further. Pamela, however, moved to block the doorway. "Marvin," she said, very quietly, but in a voice like a handful of razor blades. He recognized the tone and the look in her eyes. There were times when you could jerk Pamela around, and there were times when simple survival required you to back off. There's no doubt what kind of time this was. "All right," Marvin said. "Let me go after them anyway. Keep an eye on them. God knows what the redskin sons of bitches are liable to walk off with." Is the liquor cabinet locked? The drumming and singing and smoking went on for the rest of the morning. The old man insisted on doing every room in the house, upstairs and down, as well as the basement, attic, and garage. At one point, Marvin paused on the stairs, hearing his wife on the hall phone. "No, really, Teresa, I swear a real Native American medicine man is doing a smoke ceremony right here in our house. It's so exciting." There was a lengthy pause, lengthy for Pamela, anyway. "Oh," she said at last, "I used to feel guilty about them, too. I mean, all the terrible things that were done to them. But you know, Baba G explained that really, the Native Americans who have it so hard nowadays, poverty and alcoholism and so on, they're the reincarnated spirits of white soldiers who killed Native people in earlier times, and that's how they're working off their karma." Upstairs, the sick kid was banging the drum and the old man was chanting and smoke was rolling back down the stairs. Marvin stayed to listen a moment longer. "I wish you'd been there," Pamela was saying. "Jessica told about giving some change to this poor homeless Negro she saw in the city. Baba G said that giving was always good for one's own karma, but after all, in a previous life, that man was probably a slave ship captain." There was a happy sigh. "It's just as Baba G says, Teresa. Once you understand how karma works, you realize that everything really is for the best." Marvin snorted loudly and went on up the stairs. "Space," he mumbled, "the final frickin' frontier." A little before noon, having smoked up the garage until you could barely find the cars without feeling around, the old man stopped singing and held the smoke bundle up over his head. The kid quit drumming and said, "That's all." "That's it?" Marvin folded his arms and stared at the kid. "And for this you expect me to cough up $100? The old man was bent over, grinding the glowing end of the bundle against the floor to extinguish it. Without looking up, he said something in Algonquin, or whatever the hell language this was. The kid said, "You don't have to pay now. We'll come back tomorrow. If you're not satisfied with the results by then, you don't have to pay at all." Marvin started to tell him not to waste his time. The old man turned and looked at Marvin with dark turtle eyes, and Marvin heard himself say, "Okay, sure. See you then." When they were gone, Marvin went back into the house and got out the key to the liquor cabinet. It wasn't often that he had a drink this early in the day, but his nerves were just about shot. The smoke had thinned, a good deal inside the house, but the scent was still strong. You could even smell it out on the sun deck, where he took his drink. He leaned against the railing and looked out over the ocean, enjoying the salt breeze and the swishing mutter of small waves over the sand below. Saturday morning shot to hell. At least it was over. Maybe there'd be a good game on TV this afternoon, or a fight, even a movie, so long as there weren't any Indians in it. He became aware that his fingertips were tapping steadily on the railing, thumping out a medium-fast 4/4 beat that was, he realized then, the same rhythm the Indian kid had been beating on his drum. "Jesus H. Christ," he said aloud, drowned his drink in one long shuddering gulp. Pamela stayed on the phone for the rest of the afternoon, telling her big story to one cuckoo clock friend after another. Since this kept her off Marvin's back, he figured the whole thing had almost been worth it. Went into the kitchen and stuck a frozen dinner into the microwave. The smoke smell was still very pronounced, but the air looked clear and normal now. He took the cardboard tray out to the sun deck and ate his lunch, and then the sound of the ocean drowned out the Indian music that kept running through his head. Later he tried without success to find a game on television. All the sports shows were taken up with silly crap like tennis. That would just about make it perfect. Spend the afternoon watching a couple bull dykes batting a stupid ball back and forth across a net. Finally, he found a Bronson movie he hadn't seen before, and after that, over on PBS, Louis Ruckhiser had some really interesting things to say about the stock market, so Marvin made it through the afternoon. Most of the time, he hardly noticed the smoke smell at all. Only a few times, maybe once or twice an hour, did he catch himself tapping a foot or finger to the beat of the Indian kid's drum. When they went out to dinner that evening, Marvin drove clear to the next town up the coast, to a not particularly good and very overpriced steakhouse rather than eat at Antonio's. He was feeling particularly pissed off at Antonio, whom he suspected of setting the whole thing up as a practical joke. I'd have drowned the grinning little greaseball, Marvin thought, in his own frickin' lobster tank. A little after 11 that night, Marvin was sitting in the living room trying to read Rush Limbaugh's latest book when Pamela called him from the head of the stairs. He had the radio on, turned to a New Jersey station that played country and western, which he hated. He was trying to use one irritation against another. A bunch of gomers singing through their noses might cancel out that goddamn Indian racket that wouldn't get out of his mind. Pamela had to call several times before he got up and came to the foot of the stairs. "What?" "You'd better go out and have a look, Marvin," she said calmly. "There are people down on our beach." "Aw, shit. He'd always known it would happen sooner or later, but why did it have to happen now?" "Give me my shotgun," he said, "and phone the cops." Pamela didn't move. "Don't overreact, Marvin. I don't think there are more than 2 of them. They don't seem to be doing anything. They're not even close to the house. Probably just walking along the beach in the moonlight." "Sure." Marvin threw up his hands. "Right. I'll just go see if they'd like a complimentary bottle of champagne. Maybe a little violin music." He went down the hallway and through the kitchen, muttering. Probably some gang of crackhead punks from the city looking for white people to rob and rape and murder. Pamela wouldn't be so goddamn serene when they tied her up and took turns screwing her in the ass before they killed her. He hoped they'd let him watch. The glass door slid silently open and Marvin stepped sock-footed out onto the deck. The tide was out and the sea was calm. In the quiet, he could definitely hear voices down on the beach. He reached back through the door and flipped a switch. Suddenly, the area beneath him was flooded with light, bright as day. One of the voices made a sound of surprise. Marvin grinned to himself. Hadn't cost much to have those big lights installed underneath the deck. He'd known they'd come in handy some night like this. He walked quickly across the deck and peered over the railing. It was almost painful to look down. The white sand reflected the light with dazzling intensity. Had no trouble, though, in seeing the 2 men standing on the beach, halfway between the house and the water, or in recognizing these 2 brown faces that looked up at him. "Hi, Mr. Bradshaw," the Indian kid called. "Hope we didn't disturb you." The old man said something in Indian talk. The kid said, "My grandfather wants to apologize for coming around so late. It was a busy night at the restaurant, and Mr. Coelho wouldn't let me off any sooner." "What the hell?" Marvin said, finally able to speak. "You ought to come down here," the kid said. "You'll want to see this." The logical thing to do at this point, of course, was to get back to the house and call the police and have these 2 arrested for trespassing. Then it would come out how Marvin had gotten involved with the red bastards in the first place. Local cops didn't like Marvin, for various reasons, and would probably spread the story all over the area, how he had hired an Indian medicine man to get the cockroaches out of his house. And if he simply shot the sons of bitches, he'd go to jail. There was no justice for a white man anymore. Marvin went back through the house. Pamela was still standing on the stairs. "Those damn Indians," he told her as he paused. "If they scout me, you can call 911. "No, you'll probably bring them in for tea and cookies." He went out the front door and around the house and down the wooden stairway to the beach. 2 Indians were still there. The old man was down in a funny crouch while the kid was bent over with his hands on his knees. He seemed to be looking at something on the ground. "Here, Mr. Bradshaw," the kid said without looking up. "Look at this." Marvin walked toward them, feeling the sand crunch softly beneath his feet, realizing he'd forgotten to put on his shoes. Sock full of sand. Great. He came up between the old man and the kid and said, "All right, what's the—" And then in a totally different voice, "Jesus God Almighty." He'd never seen so many cockroaches in all his life. The sand at his feet was almost hidden by a dark carpet of flat, scuttling bodies. The light from the floodlamps glinted off their shiny brown backs and picked out a forest of waving antennae. Marvin leaped back and bumped into Pamela, who had followed him. "Look out, Marvin," she said crossly, and then she screamed and clutched at him. The cockroaches, Marvin saw now, were not spreading out over the beach or running in all directions in their usual way. They covered a narrow strip, maybe 3 feet wide, no more. They were all moving together. A cockroach river that started somewhere in the shadow of the house and ran straight as Fifth Avenue across the sandy beach, to vanish into the darkness in the direction of the ocean. Marvin could hear a faint, steady rustling like wind through dry leaves. "You wanted them out of your house," the kid said. "Well, there they go." "How?" Pamela's voice trailed off weakly. "They're going home," the kid said, "or trying to." Marvin barely heard the words. He was watching the cockroaches, unable to pull his eyes away from the scurrying horde. He walked toward the house, studying the roaches, and came up against the base of the bluff. Sure enough, the roaches were pouring straight down the rock face in a brown cataract that seemed to be coming from up under the foundation of the house. "See," the kid was saying, "the kind of roaches you got, the little brown cockroaches like you see in houses in this part of the country, they're not native. Book says they're German cockroaches. Some say they came over with those Hessian mercenaries the king hired to fight Washington's guys. I don't know about that. Anyway, the white people brought them over from Europe. Marvin turned and stared at the kid for a moment. And he looked out at the cockroaches again. Frickin' foreigners, he muttered. I should have known. Now down in Florida and around the Gulf, the kid added, you get those really big tropical roaches. They came over from Africa on slave ships. Then there's the kind that comes from Asia. Very hard to kill. Pamela said, and your grandfather's medicine makes them want to go back where they came from. Well, where their ancestors came from. Makes them have to. Look! Marvin was tracking the cockroach stampede in the other direction now, out across the beach. The moon was up and full. Even beyond floodlight range, it was easy to see the dark strip against the shiny, damp, low-tide sand. At the water's edge, the cockroaches did not hesitate. Steadily, without a single break in the flow, they scurried headlong into the sea. The calm water of the shallows was dotted with dark specks and clumps that had to be the bodies of hundreds, maybe thousands of roaches. Marvin found himself remembering something he'd heard. I could line all the Chinamen up and march them into the ocean, and they'd never stop coming because they bred so fast. The old man spoke as Marvin came walking back across the sand. The kid said, he says he'll leave it on the rest of the night in case you got rats or mice. It works on them too? Pamela asked. Sure, the kid nodded. No extra charge. The hell, Marvin said. You're to claim you people didn't have rats or mice either before Columbus? Some kinds. Woods and field mice, water rats, sure. But your common house mouse or your gray Norway rat, those black rats you see in the city, they all came over on ships. I don't see any, Pamela observed. Oh, you wouldn't, not yet. The bigger the animal, the longer the medicine takes to work. Matter of body weight. You take a real big gray rat, he might not feel it for the rest of the night. Along about daybreak, though, he'll come down here and start trying to swim back to Norway or wherever. The old man spoke again. My grandfather says we'll come back tomorrow so he can turn the medicine off. Can't leave it on too long. Things happen. At their feet, the cockroaches streamed onward toward oblivion. Marvin slept badly that night, tormented by a persistent dream in which he ran in terror across an endless, empty plain beneath a dark sky. A band of Indians pursued him, whooping and waving tomahawks and beating drums, while ranks of man-sized cockroaches stood on their hind legs on either side, shouting at him in Spanish. Pamela appeared in front of him, naked. It is your karma, Marvin, she cried. He saw that she had long antennae growing from her head and an extra set of arms where her breasts had been. He sat up in bed, sweating and shaking. The smoke smell in the room was so strong he could hardly breathe. Gah, he said aloud, and fought the tangled covers off him and got up to stand on wobbly legs for a moment in the darkness. On her side of the bed, Pamela mumbled, Marvin? But she didn't turn over, and he knew she wasn't really awake. He went downstairs, holding tight to the banister, got a bottle of Johnny Walker from the liquor cabinet. In the darkness, halfway, he took a big drink and then another straight from the bottle. First one almost came back up, but the second felt a lot better. He carried the bottle back upstairs to the guest bedroom, where he cranked the windows wide open, turned on the big ceiling fan, and stretched out on the bed. He still smelled the smoke, but another belt of scotch helped that. He lay there drinking for a long time, until finally the whiskey eased him off into a sodden sleep. He dreamed again. This time there were no Indians or cockroaches. In fact, it was a pleasant dream, which he found himself strolling across gentle rolling pasture land. Big oak trees grew along the footpath where he walked, the branches heavy with spring green leaves. Sheep grazed on a nearby hillside. In the distance, at the crest of a high hill, was the gray walls and battlements of an ancient-looking castle. A winding dirt road led up to the castle gate. He saw now that a troop of soldiers in redcoats were marching along it, heading in his direction. Poong, 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 poong of their drums carried across the field to Marvin. He could hear their voices raised in song. Hey-ya, 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 yo hey, hey-ha, no way, ah-ho, ha-no, ya-ho, ho-ho. He woke again with the sun shining through the windows. He lay for a long time with a pillow over his face, knowing he wasn't going to enjoy getting up. When he finally emerged from the guest bedroom, sweaty and unshaven, it was almost midday. Passing the main bathroom, he heard the shower running. Pamela would have been up for hours. She always got up ridiculously early so she could do her silly meditation and yoga exercises on the deck as the sun came up. Marvin was sitting in the living room drinking coffee when the doorbell rang. He lurched to his feet, said, "Shit," and headed for the front door. Sunlight stabbed viciously at his eyes when he opened the door. He blinked against the pane. He opened his eyes again and saw the 2 Indians standing on his porch. "Sorry if we're a little early," the kid said. "I have to be at work soon." Marvin regarded them without warmth. "How you want now?" "Well, you know, Mr. Bradshaw, my grandfather did a job for you." Marvin nodded. That was a mistake. When the agony in his head receded, he said, "And now you want to get paid. Wait here a minute." There was no way these 2 clowns could make a claim stick, but he didn't feel up to a nasty scene. His wallet was upstairs in the bedroom, but he knew Pamela kept a little cash in a vase on the mantelpiece for paying delivery boys and the like. He dug out the roll and peeled off a 20, went back to the front door. "There you are, Chief. Buy yourself a new feather." The old man didn't touch the 20. $100, he said in English. Marvin laughed sourly. "Dream on, Sitting Bull. Been a nice guy giving you anything after you stank up my house. Take the 20 or forget it." The old man jabbered at the kid. He didn't take his eyes off Marvin. The kid said, "You don't pay, he won't turn the medicine off." "Ha! That's supposed to worry me? If I believed in this crap at all, I wouldn't want it turned off. Leave it on. Keep the roaches away forever." "That's not how it works," the kid said. "Won't affect anything that wasn't in the house when the medicine was made." Marvin thought of something. "Look, I'll tell you what I'll do. Give me some of that stuff you were burning yesterday, okay? I'll write you a check for $100 right now." After all, when you cut past the superstitious bullshit, there had to be something to that smoke that got rid of roaches better than anything on the market. Screwed up the brains, maybe, who knew? Take a sample to a lab, have it analyzed. Could be a multi-million-dollar product in there. It's worth gambling 100. Hell, I might not even stop payment on the check. Maybe. But the old man shook his head, and the kid said, "Sorry, Mr. Bradshaw, that's all secret. Anyway, wouldn't work without the song." Marvin's vision went even redder than it already was. "All right," he shouted. "Get off my porch. Get that rusty piece of shit out of my driveway. Haul your red asses out of here." The kid opened his mouth. "You want trouble, Tonto? You got a license to run a pest control business in this county? Go on. Move." When the rattling blat of the old pickup's exhaust had died away, Marvin returned to the living room. Pamela was standing on the stairs in a white terry robe. Her hair was wet. She looked horribly cheerful. "I thought I heard voices," she said. "Was it those Native Americans? I hope you paid them generously." Marvin sank onto the couch. "I gave them what they had coming." "I'm just disappointed I didn't get to see them again. Such an honor, having a real medicine man in my house. Such an inspiring ceremony, too. Remember that lovely song he sang? I can still hear it in my mind over and over like a mantra. Isn't that wonderful?" Singing happily to herself, "Hey-ya, hey-yo, hey-ya," she trotted down the stairs, and poong, poong, poong went the drum in Marvin's head. He spent the rest of the day lying on the living room couch, mostly with his eyes closed, wishing he could sleep. Made no move toward the liquor supply. He would have loved a drink. His stomach wouldn't have stood for it. Hangover didn't get any better. Times it seemed the top of his skull must surely crack open like an overcooked egg. His whole body ached as if he'd fallen down a flight of stairs. Even the skin of his face felt too tight. Worst of all, he was still hearing Indian music louder and clearer and more insistent than ever. Up to now, it had been no more than a nuisance. One of those maddening tricks the brain occasionally plays, like having the Gilligan's Island theme stuck in your mind all day. Now it had become a relentless clamor that filled the inside of his head with the savage boom of the drum and the endless ululation of the old man's voice. And from time to time, Marvin put his hands over his ears, though he knew it would do no good. He might even have screamed if that would have hurt too much. Pamela had vanished around noon, off to visit her crazy friends, Marvin thought. Dolly, never mind her poor damn husband. Around 4, he tottered into the kitchen. Not that he had any appetite, but maybe some food would settle his stomach. And he happened to glance out through the glass doors, and there she was, down on the beach. She wore a long white dress, and she appeared to be dancing, back and forth along the sand, just above the line of the incoming tide. She wore a long white dress, and she appeared to be dancing. Her hands were raised above her head, clapping. He couldn't hear the sound, but his eyes registered the rhythm. Clap, 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 in perfect sync with the drumming in his head and the boom of blood in his throbbing temples. The sun went down at last. Marvin left the lights off, finding the darkness soothing. He wondered if Pamela was still down on the beach. "Pamela?" he called, and again there was no answer. He decided he didn't give enough of a damn to go look for her. But time went by and still no sign of her, and finally Marvin got to his feet and shuffled to the door. Wasn't safe, white woman out alone on a beach at night. Besides, he needed some fresh air. The stink of smoke was so bad it seemed to stick to his skin. He itched all over. He went slowly down the wooden steps to the little beach. The moon was up and full, and the white sand fairly gleamed. He could see the whole beach, clear out to the silver line that marked the retreating edge of the sea. He couldn't see Pamela anymore. He walked out across the sand with no real idea of what he expected to find. His feet seemed to move on their own, without consulting him, and he let them. His body no longer hurt. Even his headache was gone. The drumming in his head was very loud now, a deadening poon, 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 poon. It somehow didn't bother him anymore. Damp sand below the high tide mark held a line of small shoeless footprints, headed out toward the water. Marvin followed without haste or serious interest. He saw something ahead, whiter than the sand. When he got there, he was not greatly surprised to recognize Pamela's dress. The footprints ended at the water's edge. Marvin stood there for a while, looking out over the moonlit ocean. His eyes were focused on nothing nearer than the invisible horizon. His toes tapped out a crunchy rhythm on the wet sand. He took a step forward. Up at the top of the bluff, sitting on a big rock, the Indian kid from Antonio said, "There he goes!" Beside him, his grandfather grunted softly. "How long's it been?" "Since she went in?" Kid checked his cheap digital watch. The little bulb was broken, but the moonlight was plenty strong. "Hour and a half, about." Didn't think he was that much bigger than her. "She had small bones." "Uh-huh," the old man grinned. "I saw you when she took off her dress. Thought you were going to fall off the bluff." "She did have a good shape," the kid said, "for a woman her age." They watched as Marvin Bradshaw walked steadily into the sea. But now the water was up to his waist, but he kept going. "Guess he can't swim," the kid remarked. "Wouldn't do him much good if he could. Come on, son. Time we were leaving." As they walked back to the truck, the kid said, "Will you teach me to make that medicine?" "Someday, when you're ready." "Does it have a name? You know, what you did back there? What do you call it?" "A start." The kid began laughing. A moment later, the old man joined in with his dry, wispy chuckle. He was still laughing as they drove away, up the coast road and toward the distant glow of the main highway. Behind them, the sea stretched away, flat and shining in the moonlight, its surface broken only by the small, dark spot that was the head and shoulders of Marvin Bradshaw, wading toward Europe.